This episode is brought to you by cloudpano.com. Adding more revenue to your business is simple. Offer more value. With CloudPano, you can create 360 tours and present them to your clients quickly and efficiently. It only takes 5 minutes to create a VR tour with cloudpano.com, and your clients will be thrilled. You can now avoid monthly fees with their new lifetime license option. For a limited time, you can save $100 on a lifetime license using the code Shooting Spaces at checkout. Join the movement and join CloudPano today.
This is Shooting Spaces with Rich Baum and Brian Berkowitz.
Hello and welcome to Shooting Spaces. This is Brian from New York.
And Rich Baum from beautiful Sacramento, California, and it really is beautiful today. So,
yes, thank you all for tuning in, and it's beautiful here in New York today, minus the tragedy we're all going through. But other than that, everything is shining. I was outside riding I taught my kid how to ride a bike in this beautiful way, downtime that I'm have at home. So my 5-year-old son knows how to ride a bike now. So I'm getting things done.
About time. Good.
About time. He's 5, man.
No, I'm saying get him out there young. Absolutely.
Oh, all right, good. What about you, Rich? You're sick of being home?
Yeah, and I just want to say this podcast is, what is it coming? We're recording it before it's released.
It's going to be mid-April.
Mid-April. So I just want to say we don't know what's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks. So it'll be very interesting, and I want everybody to cross your fingers and just hope that it will get over soon, and hopefully by the time this is released, it will be on the downswing, and we can get back to living our lives. But again, it is great having my kids here and being with them. But it's so funny. I am literally busier right now than I am normally because I'm doing that fundraiser and I am doing so much stuff, and it's just. I got to do chores and windows and cleaning and pools and you name it. So, but I'm thrilled to be doing it and just happy to be here.
Well, let's get right into it. We have a fun discussion today I'm looking forward to personally. And we always get a lot of feedback when we get away a little bit from the photography camera side of things and what people like to do and equipment and gear side of things and talk whether business or this or that. So we're going to have a discussion today with a veteran and a good friend of ours who's been on the show a few times. I don't know, 2 times, 3 times. And we did the webinar with him, Tony Colangelo. Tony, thanks for coming on with us again today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm sorry I lost count how many times you've been on the show, but we always love having you. And, now you're a personal friend of both of us. So it's always good to come and chat with you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. And it's always a lot of fun.
Great. So the reason I originally asked you to come on was based off an article you wrote on PFRE, which going back about 2 months now, I didn't realize it was so long, called "Are You Getting in the Way of Your Own Creativity?" And for me personally, this article was great for me at the time because, I was involved in my own kick about researching creativity and how to, bring out your creative side and what is a creative now that the word creative is, I guess, a noun instead of an adjective nowadays. But to bring out, your creativity, and you put out this article and I said, hey, let's get you on and let's talk about this because I think it'll make for a little bit of an entertaining discussion and something a little bit different than what we normally do. So just to start off before we get into the, what your article talked about and some things from there, what inspired you to write an article on creativity or even have that idea? Besides just creative.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I have a photography coaching practice. That's a big chunk of my photography business. And it just dawned on me after thinking through an awful lot of recent clients that this theme kept coming up, not over and over again, but frequently enough that it was a theme. And that's how I actually started the article. That was a true story where someone in a coaching session, early on in the process said, Tony, I really want to transition from from real estate to shooting for interior designers. And we talked about that. And it became very, very clear to me that this particular fellow was more than the usual anxious that people are when they talk about making that sort of transition. So we explored it a little bit. And after asking him a few questions, it came out that he didn't think he was creative enough to work with an interior designer. So I asked him a couple of questions about that. And it dawned upon me that it's not that he wasn't creative, but his own beliefs about what creativity actually is. It was that belief that was getting in the way of him seeing himself as a creative. So I thought, you know something, if this fellow is having these sorts of concerns and not really talking about it, just, holding on to that anxiety, I bet other people are also feeling that. And I thought, boy, this would be just a good topic for a post. And that's how it got started.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a common belief. People see some of the top tier work out there and they think, I can't produce that. I'm not creative enough. But,
Yeah.
It's kind of like you're saying now, and we'll get into in deeper depth. We'll get in a little deeper. But creativity doesn't have to mean producing what some of the top tier photographers produce. I mean, creativity can be anything from that to, thinking about what I'm going to do when I go upstairs later after we finish recording this podcast. All that is some level of creativity that goes on in your head.
Yeah. Yeah. You can do a Google search on the definition of creativity. And, once you get past the dictionary definition, there are some really, really interesting viewpoints on what creativity is. For me, it's always been about, whether it be conscious or subconscious, it's always been about a moment where a number of things come together that you hadn't really thought about before, and you have all of these bits of information, and quite often they're unrelated. They're disparate bits of information that come together, and in a moment of inspiration, in a nanosecond, you have an idea, right? Out of the nothingness is this wonderful idea. So to me, it's about making connections. That's what creativity is. And it doesn't generally, people, when they think about creativity or creatives, they think about artistic endeavors, right? Painting on a canvas, taking a photograph, sculpting a piece of rock. When really, if you take a look at that definition about making connections, that can apply to anything. The business person who is losing sleep because he or she doesn't know how their organization is going to hit its profitability numbers this quarter. They're in the shower one day and, lo and behold, a light bulb goes off over their head, and they have this great idea and they run it by their team, and it's great. Sales pick up or what have you. And to me, bringing that moment together, different thoughts, and maybe in the shower he or she was thinking about what the competitors were doing. It's just something out there, some bits of information that sort of coalesce and come together in like a nanosecond, and all of a sudden you have this bit of inspiration, you have this bit of creativity. So it could be art, it could be business, it could be parenting, it could be coming up with a budget. It could be a number of things. I think we all have, all of us have the capacity, the ability to be creative.
Yeah, and I think it's just different. Like you said, if you're a businessman, you come up with an idea in a shower, and I think, there's something to that also. Especially when you become obsessed with an idea, whether you're a photographer or, like you said, a painter, or a salesman who's just trying to figure out the best new pitch. Yeah. When you're sitting there and you I don't want to say become obsessed, but those thoughts never leave your mind. That's kind of where that inspiration comes from, because you're thinking about it all day and night, and things that you do in everyday life inspire your ideas.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, I'm assuming we'll talk about it more in our discussion tonight. But you know, there's been a bunch of research done on creativity and creative thought. And one of the best practices, and I'll be sharing some of this information later on. One of the best practices is actually to stop focusing what you're thinking about and to think about something different, because it clears pathways in your brain. And then when you come back to the task at hand, you're better able to make those connections.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that, because I never consciously realized that, but that's the case for me. You know, sometimes I'll be upstairs and I come down to my wife and I'll be like, you know what I just thought of? And she'll be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So it's exactly that. It's when you, I guess, I don't want to say distract yourself, but perhaps distract yourself from, you know, what you're trying to achieve, is when you come up with these creative ideas. And I guess you can call them ideas versus, you know, I guess all of us, we think about creativity in terms of going out to a shoot and coming up with a good composition, but I feel like creativity is so much more than that.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about it. You know, as you know, Brian, I have another business devoted to working with corporate leaders. And when I work with corporate leaders on how do you get better at strategic thinking? It seems counterintuitive, but one of the things that I talk about is asking my clients to actually get up and go for a walk. The whole idea about getting into a different environment, and there's research on this as well, getting into a different environment, a different mindset, not thinking about it. The whole idea about, you know, I'm going for a walk to clear my head is absolutely true. And that's a big part of it. You know, when you hear writers, when they have writer's block, you know, they're staring at their monitor and it's, you know, they might be typing something in a Google Doc or a Word document, and they're staring at this blank page. Well, that's a necessary thing, because on some level, either conscious or subconscious, they are working things through in their head. So all of this is creativity.
Yeah. May I jump in here a second?
Please.
As Brian was saying, that, you know, sometimes you have to take your mind off and not concentrate.
Yeah.
I actually was looking before, I was just researching this, reading your article and thinking about it as we're talking, how I would go about it and how it works for me. I almost find it to be the opposite. I almost find it to be, and I think you're involved in my process along with several other people, mentors and people in my mind. But when we started working with you on composition, I look at composition is now getting out of, now real estate photography for me, is wide, and it is formulated, and it is, you know, it is the same thing over and over and over. And there are certainly differences in every house. That's one thing I love about it. I would go crazy if I didn't have that. But when I try and do a creative shot within a real estate shoot, which I'm always telling photographers, take at least 1 minute in a kitchen and do a couple of shots for yourself. Yeah. Different angles, different compositions. And then you come in my mind and starting to think of rule of thirds and the, what's the spinny one that goes there? The golden.
That's the golden circle.
The golden circle and whatever the cockamamie things you just made up. I know they're not real, but they are real, folks. But I just want to say that when I get out there and I take these tools I have inside of me, but I have to remember to get them out, that's when I'm able to be creative. And I actually don't want to forget about everything. I want to now concentrate on thinking of things differently, which to me is creative, because doing real estate shoots are the same thing. And I think then they are creative, but they're less creative than if I'm doing something else or something for fun. So for me, it seems to work best. And again, I was mentioning when we first started talking before the podcast, I'm left-handed and dyslexic, so I think I'm the perfect candidate to be ultra creative because I had to be creative to make up for whatever shortcomings I found in my challenges in life. But I really think that sometimes getting out there and using some of the things in my mind and getting that Tony Colangelo or Wayne Capelli or whoever's in my mind, every so often a Brian Berkowitz pops in there, which is really scary. But when I get those things in front of me, then they help me to be creative and spark me to think outside the box, which, is part of it. But I really enjoy that, Brian, you mentioned even creativity for a salesperson. It's not just art. It is thinking outside the box and just finding another way of doing something. I guess it's being creative. So I hadn't thought of it that way. So thank you.
Rich, in terms of what you've just said, is actually not too much different with what we had started to talk about, because really what you're talking about fits that definition that I've shared about creativity, where it's taking different bits of information. Quite often they are disparate, unrelated bits of information, and somehow, some way in your brain, for a millisecond, all those different things come together. So we're really talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
It's really coming together and synthesizing, distilling different bits of information into this moment to create something.
Sure. And I think it has a lot to do with giving yourself permission to step outside the box. It can be scary for people. I know when we were at PFRE and I knew that there were a lot of people, and not necessarily at PFRE, but then there were some at PFRE, but a lot of people are scared and don't want to take that leap and get creative. They feel comfortable in where they are at. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And I felt that all of the educators need to know, obviously not everybody wants to be a Mike Kelly or a Tony Roslin, but I think that it is stepping outside your comfort zone and feeling free. And that's why it's fun to just take a couple of shots on your own, because you can either use them in a real estate shoot for your agent or just keep them for yourself. But it helps you practice being creative.
Yeah. Well, Rich, you just, I was going to ask you this, Tony, later, but Rich kind of just brought it up. So I feel like I'll just jump ahead a little bit. But I read a book about a month ago called Creativity Inc. I don't know if you've ever read it. It was by Ed Catmull, who is the head or the founder of Pixar, who we all know is owned by Disney now, and they come out with all these animated films. Yeah. And he basically wrote a book about the culture in Pixar. And one of the things he said, and I'm bringing this up now because Rich just mentioned it, is fear of failure is what prevents creativity.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd love to get your thoughts on that, Tony.
Well, yeah, I've been doing an awful lot of thinking in preparing for this podcast, because one of the questions that I'm hoping you're going to ask me is, how does someone increase their creativity? And Rich has already touched upon one of them. So in terms of, if we want to jump to that right now, the way I was organizing my thinking, Brian, in terms of how to increase one's creativity, I was sort of categorizing it into three buckets. One is, what do you do or what can you do before a shoot? What do you do at the shoot? And what do you do after the shoot? Okay?
Get stoned.
What?
Get stoned.
Well, you're in California, isn't that?
No, I just think that there are a lot of ways, and that's one way to really spark up your creativity.
Well, look, before a shoot, and I think this is touching upon something that both of you have said, is going into it with a mindset that you are, in fact, creative, or at the very least, you're open. Some part of you is open to getting better at creativity. Just having that mindset. I'm not saying going from black to white, but maybe from black to a dark gray. I mean, just opening the door a little bit to creativity.
Well, every decision that somebody makes on a shoot, no matter how experienced they are, is part of the creative process. To decide to shoot from this angle versus that angle is part of the creative process. So people don't realize that they're being creative every time they go out there and put their camera on a tripod.
Exactly.
But relating to your article, Tony, this person, what did you call him? Michael or John?
Jake.
Yeah. Okay. Well, he, I think it would help him to make a point of on a shoot, and myself included, we have to remind ourselves to be creative. We have to push ourselves, and we maybe just you have to set an alarm that goes off going creativity, and before a shoot, put a little thing on your window or your wall, whatever that says, don't forget to be creative. Because most of the time for me, I just get wrapped up in it, and before you know it, I've been doing a whole shoot and I really haven't done anything that I feel is creative.
Yeah.
Although I've been creative the whole time, it's just not something that is different than what I'm doing normally.
Yeah. So I agree. So it's not just being open to creativity, but actually making the time, trying to create time for creativity. As both of you know, I mean, a big chunk of what I talk about on my composition tutorial is related to hard neuroscience, right? And certainly one of the things that we do know from a neuroscience perspective, there's an old saying that I stumbled across, cells that fire together, wire together, right? So when people get into a rut, when people have a certain belief about something, they are really hardwired perhaps to think that way. And if you take a look at it from a neuroscience perspective, all that means is that it's the same neurochemicals jumping from synapse to synapse, and that same pattern keeps coming over and over and over again. And those patterns are actually thoughts. So we can break that. And one of the ways that we do that is by A, being open to creativity, B, Rich, doing what you suggested and actually practicing, trying to be creative. And this leads me to the third point that I wanted to make about improving creativity, is that the focus should be on the process of trying to be creative rather than on the outcome, rather than on the photos that you take. So yeah, you could go home and you could be all excited that you're taking some creative shots, and then you download the photos and you think, oh my God, these are crap. No, they're just the next step in your growth as a creative. Just because they didn't turn out the way that you had expected or even hoped for doesn't mean that you weren't being creative, right? Because
did Michelangelo ever come home after painting and say, crap, this sucks?
Actually, you know something? He did. He did.
This sucks. Yeah, with an Italian accent.
I can tell you a few Michelangelo. He's a countryman of mine. I could tell you a few Michelangelo stories. Anyway, but the point is practicing, being open to things. Another best practice about getting better at creativity is actually thinking about unfamiliar topics. Going on the Discovery Channel. This is if you're tired of editing one night, go watch a few minutes on the Discovery Channel and then come back to your editing. I bet you your editing improves. It's just doing different things just to stimulate different parts of your brain. So doing research on unfamiliar topics is very, very helpful. And as a matter of fact, in prepping for our podcast today, I did some reading from a psychologist by the name of Scott Barry Kaufman. And he says that openness to new experience is the strongest personality trait for predicting creative achievement. Right? So it's not shooting a billion real estate shots. It's maybe shooting, it's a lot of real estate shots, but also being good at another genre of photography. Maybe you're good at cooking or some other sort of creative endeavor, because those creative skills, the process of being creative is what we're trying to develop, not getting a perfect creative photo. That's the outcome. The goal is to get better at the process of becoming more creative. So shoot different things. I know that a lot of folks in our community, particularly if they're shooting, 5, 6, 7, 8 houses a day, the last thing they want to do is put a camera in their hand and practice different types of photography. But I'm telling you, if you do that, for me, when I'm in a rut with my interiors or architectural shooting, one of the things that I do is I shoot macro. And that helps enormously, right? So trying different genres. The other thing to improve creativity is to do what we're doing here on this podcast, just talking to colleagues, bouncing ideas off of one another. And that's one of the great things about being part of a Facebook group like yours, Rich, or maybe, adding to discussions on PFRE and other social media spots. It's really getting input from other people, getting more ideas into your head that when the moment comes and you feel stuck, somehow, some way, out of the nothingness, this idea comes in and spark. You've already, you've figured out a way to shoot this scene better, right? So it's just being open to all of it.
Yeah, for me, that's been the biggest thing, Tony, is, first sharing my work and getting critiqued by others, where some people say, you should have done this differently or done this differently. Or, even when, we did our coaching and you sat there and politely told me how much my portfolio sucks and this is why. But the truth of the matter is, it improved what I was doing, and enabled me to look at things a different way. And, for the first thing that comes to mind is, and I'm going to use a specific example, is when we did our webinar, we used that pool shot I have of the exterior. Yeah. And, that pool shot, after I sent that to you, you said, why do you have 5 feet of the left on there? For what reason? It's not serving any purpose. I had that little hut. I don't know if you remember specifically what I'm talking about.
I remember.
And then now I go in with a more purposeful approach and I look at it and I say, well, if I'm going to shoot this, is that necessary? Does it help this image in any way? And it kind of trains your thought process to think differently when you're going on site. So these little tidbits that you pick up, whether it's by you or somebody else who makes a comment on one of my pictures, those stuff, that stuff resonates with you when you're on site, and it gives you a different approach to it.
Yeah. So these are some of the things that you can do on your own time before a shoot. So that's the before bucket that I was talking about. At the actual shoot, I'll just reiterate an improved attitude, a sense of anticipation, focusing on the process, not the outcome, trying to avoid being so hard on yourself and putting all that pressure on you. At the end of the day, we are professionals. Taking shots is a creative endeavor. And so, there might be a shoot or two where we don't get the results that we want, but that's okay. The goal is to continue getting better. At a shoot, I know a lot of photographers who actually bring music to a shoot. And there has been loads of research done on that in terms of the language of music and what it does for the brain that can spark creativity. Yeah, Albert Einstein.
I do that.
There's a bunch of stuff on Albert Einstein when he was coming up with his various models, where when he was stuck, he took time out and he listened to Mozart, right? So bringing music to a shoot can augment creativity. In terms of the actual tactics that we use at a shoot, try different stuff.
Like Rich just said, yeah.
Try doing, opening up opening up the aperture to 1.8 or something like that, and throwing in some bokeh, and trying to do an artsy shot. What does that do for you? Setting your camera on a timer and setting the shutter speed at a certain speed that it would blur someone walking through the shot. Well, set your camera on a timer and you yourself walk through the shot. See what happens.
I'm going to sound like an idiot, but I actually did that 3 days ago on a shoot. I literally, and I should post the picture in the show notes. I literally set my camera on a 10-second timer. I had to do it like 7 times to get myself where I wanted to get me.
Yeah.
And I literally set my camera on 10 seconds. And even to add on top of it, which Rich knows, I got from Canon a loaner for the 90mm tilt shift to borrow for a week. So I was playing around in this developer's place with a new lens that I never tried and trying to bring a human element into it. And I set my camera on 10 seconds. And it was a 90mm lens. So I'd have to run to the other side of the room. 10 seconds and try to walk up the stairs to get myself walking up the stairs at the exact moment where I crossed the white panel on the background. And I had to do it like 6 times, but exactly.
Well, look, I know that there are probably colleagues who are, going to listen to this podcast and they're going to be saying to themselves, you have got to be kidding me. I am shooting 5, 6, 8 houses a day. I don't have the time for this nonsense. And look, if that's your business model and if that's what pays the rent or the mortgage, God bless, all the power to you. But in terms of creativity, we're not suggesting that you do it in each one of the 30 shots that you're going to submit for MLS. But if you want to spend an extra minute on a money shot room, on a hero shot room, like a kitchen or a living room or a master ensuite, then spend a minute or 2 extra to think things through, to be inspired, rather than shoot corner to corner. What does a 1 point look like? How do I do this? What can I do that? And so, and that leads me probably to the most important thing that you can do to improve your creativity. And I know this is going to come across as self-serving because I've got a tutorial on it. But honest to goodness, I mean, if you want to improve your creativity, composition. Try different things. Raise your camera, lower your camera, take a few feet to the left or right, zoom in, zoom out. What are the results? We've been talking about creativity being a point of connection between all these different thoughts. Well, the result that you get from zooming in, zooming out, going left, going right, these are all different bits of input that if you examine them all, somewhere in there, you might get inspired and you might have a creative thought that says, something, I've been killing myself trying to get a centered 1 point for this shot, and maybe I don't need to. What happens if I move a few feet over this way and do a 1 point that affects the leading lines coming over from the left? That can be it. That's a very creative process, right? So so that's at a shoot. Those are some of the suggestions that I would have about raising creativity, inspiring more creativity. And I don't know what you guys think about that, but those are my best bits of input.
This episode is brought to you by HD Photo Hub. With modern marketing tools for your clients and a powerful back office to help you stay organized and efficient, HD Photo Hub is the secret weapon of successful real estate photographers everywhere. When you register with promo code Shooting Spaces, you'll get a free total marketing kit for your first property. Check them out at hdphotohub.com. HD Photo Hub, where great photos become powerful marketing. That's hdphotohub.com. I agree on a shoot wholeheartedly with most of that, and Rich said it too, doing something different than you would normally do it, whether it's, for me this week, as I just mentioned, it was putting a different lens on a camera. I put a 90mm tilt shift, which I borrowed from Canon, on my camera while I was on this shoot. And it's funny because I never looked through a 90mm lens on a interior shoot in my life. And, I had the 24-70, and that's probably the most I've ever looked through is at 70 millimeters. And I put it through at 90 millimeters. And
it's
it
amazing.
just gave me an entire different perspective on the home and lines that you never see. And, I actually posted a shot on Instagram today, something I never would have thought of ever to post beforehand. And it's literally just the detail of the bottom, the wainscoting on the bottom of a step. And, you see that with a 90 millimeter where you don't see that previously. So it's putting a different lens on and just viewing things differently than you would normally. And Rich is probably like going nuts because I've sent him like 40 shots this week from my 90 millimeter practice go run. But
it's
really
exciting,
they were
isn't
cool
it?
shots. I think you should post them because I'm sure you will post them
eventually.
Very creative and something completely different.
Yeah, it gives you a different, so if you have a 24-70 or 24-105, and I have the 24-105 in my bag, and I've never even thought to put it on a camera for some reason. I don't know why.
Oh, geez, that's one of my work. Aside from the tilt shift, that's one of my work.
Well, I know. Well, I have the 17, I have the 24, and I have a 2-time extender that I can use on both. So between that, I get a 35 and a 48. So it covers mostly anything I'll ever need, except now using that 90 millimeter opened up a whole new world for me. And now, everything's going to change.
Yeah. Well, what would our buddy Larry Arnall say, who never uses a tilt shift? So I'm just saying, even if you don't have a 90 millimeter tilt shift, just get out there and try. Like Scott Hargis in his videos used to always say, take out a 70-200 after you shoot.
Oh yeah,
get your lit, get some detail shots. Yeah,
absolutely.
But I think that, just only breaking you for a second, if I can, Tony, I just want to say one tip I give people, photographers. I learned from an agent who I shoot for all the time. And one time I didn't get a real detail shot, or I didn't really focus on their $12,000 range. Okay. Yeah. Or it might have been $20,000 range. But that really kicked my butt, and now I will never see something that's any better than a normal range and not take the time to shoot it. All you have to do, and this is why I tell photographers, go get yourself an L bracket, because all you have to do is, we're shooting a shot wide of a kitchen. You don't even have to move your tripod. All you have to do is zoom in, get the same thing, same lighting, same everything, and then you're going to get more of a detail shot of the stove. You can also then just unclick your clamp, rotate your camera vertically, and you don't have to reset your tripod, your geared head or head, anything, ball head, and you just now get a vertical shot. And you may not want to use a vertical shot for MLS, but you've now become creative. You've thought of the process, you've actually done it, and you might have yourself a portfolio shot, and you might, as per Adam Taylor in licensing, you might have a shot you can send to Wolf Ranges and make yourself a couple $100, okay?
Well, this is it.
That's all in one simple, we haven't moved our tripod, we haven't changed anything. All we've done is change what we're doing with what we have. Very simple.
Absolutely. So, and that's a nice little transition, Reg, to talk about the third bucket, which is after the shoot, when we get home. How can we spark creativity there? It's interesting in my research for our talk today. One of the bits of advice that came out in different articles, and it came up over and over and over again, and this is going to sound nuts. And the first time I read it, I thought it was nuts. But then it kept coming up over and over and over again. The advice was to change your surroundings, to take the little knickknacks on your desk and put them in different spots on your desk, just to give you a different vibe, a different energy. And it sounded nuts to me, but the more I read about it, the more it made sense. That, again, if moving things, because if creativity is about a connection point from different thoughts, well, if you physically move things around in your office or wherever you're editing, that might inspire different thoughts. Who knows? I think, it's maybe a silly little example, but it kept coming up over and over again. For me, from a creativity point of view, for me personally, one of the things that I do a lot is experiment with diptychs and triptychs. And I know that actually on one of the podcasts that I did for Shooting Spaces, we actually talked about that for agents who sort of freak out if you submit a shot in portrait orientation.
Vertical.
If you combine a couple of vertical orientation shots into a diptych, that will be very, very close to the 2:3 aspect ratio, and you're going to get, you're going to get two photos into one. And if the two of them are related somehow, if there are connections between them, maybe it's on the left side you have a shot of the full dining room, and on the right shot is a zoomed in capture of the table setting of that on that dining room. There you have it.
Instagram yesterday. I didn't know it was called. This is a triptych.
This is a triptych.
Okay. Well, I have a little program on my phone which you can do these things, and they're great. And I tell photographers all the time, if you want a tiny bathroom, do a vertical and put it next to another vertical, and you got a horizontal. So easy, but just be creative.
Yeah, I mean, if you go onto my website, you'll see a lot of diptychs. Another thing that you can do, and this will, if you have, the habit of being hard on yourself, is one of the things that, which is a habit that I have. I think all creatives, all artists, by nature are hard on themselves. So what I do is I actually have, I set a timer on my cell phone, and I'll, whether it be 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. And in those 3 or 5 minutes, I allow myself to beat myself up in terms of what went wrong and, how could you do this, blah, blah, blah. But once that alarm goes, I go into solution focus mode. What went well? What would I do differently? What did I do really, really well in this shot that I want to improve on the next house that I get into? Spending time, here's something to improve your creativity. Spending time learning about different aspects of our craft. So for instance, it's not just about the gear, it's about owning parts of our craft, like contrast. There are many different types of contrast that in our editing, this is why I put it in the after bucket, contrast isn't just about the brightness of things, luminance contrast. There is hue contrast. There is saturation contrast. So learning about these things, and I love doing that. It's really inspiring for me to learn about these different things and try to apply them in my editing. That leads to creativity. Now in terms of taking up some of my downtime through the pandemic here, I'm rewatching Mike Kelly's videos and Scott Hargis's videos. And, wouldn't you know it, even though it's been 2 or 3 years since I've looked at them, I'm learning stuff again, right? Because my brain's at a different spot. Maybe I'm more open to it now, who knows? But it's been a wonderful thing to do. So all of these things taken together can and will improve creativity.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea, actually. And, it's funny. I texted you like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, whatever it was, Tony, and I said, I'm watching your tutorial all over again. And I've done that because, your tutorial teaches too much, I think, to take in when you're not on site doing this stuff in practice. Yeah. So, the first time I watched it, I took in some of it and I go out and I learned it and I bring that into what I do. And then, you got to go back and rewatch it and then pick up some new things. So yeah, I never thought to go back and rewatch, Mike's video series, for instance. And I have it sitting here on my computer. There's no reason I shouldn't. But yeah, that's a good idea for the downtime. To rewatch and learn more.
I just got I follow Serge Romali, and Serge is the kind of a whimsical kind of guy. And his latest, I get these Facebook, YouTube announcements when I get a new YouTube from somebody I follow. And he just did one on. He edited a photo 10 years later, and I think he says mind blowing or something. But literally, that is something that also not only creativity, what you can do with software has changed to the point where, I mean, what you would have used 10 years ago, what you could do now, go back and recreate some of your images from 10 years ago, like Brian. You can go reshoot those HDRs you had at the beginning, and that they were wonderful as they were, but see what you can do now. And why don't you do that for us? Do it, take one of those single images and see if you can edit it to make it look where you'd like it today from what it was.
Can I tell you something? I actually, the very first thing that I've done, the way that I've spent most of my time during this downtime is I've updated the galleries on my website. And it's funny that you mentioned that, Rich, because I stumbled across a couple of photos that I have always loved, but my editing skills at the time couldn't pull out what I wanted to pull out. And now I actually spent a couple of hours re-editing them, and now they're on my website. Isn't that crazy?
I'm going to do it. And yeah. I've got actually tons and tons of photos from my travels, and where I was very into HDR. So I have more than enough brackets of every single shot, and I'm sure I can find them. So I am going to go back and re-edit some landscape and some architectural, I use that loosely, but some shots.
Well, I want to take this one step further, Rich, is I actually want to call that client for those jobs that I posted, those awful images, and reshoot it. And then really, and I wouldn't, I would go there and shoot a couple of shots just for fun. It's local in my neighborhood, and just, get the same angles, but, just to see where I was 6 years ago versus now from shooting and editing would be a nice, So
all of this stuff is exactly what we're talking about. It's making connections with bits of information that in a nanosecond becomes an idea that becomes that inspires more and hopefully better creativity.
And my pulse, I promise you, my pulse has gone up since we were talking about that. My mind is spinning. I have a hard time focusing anyway, but my mind is spinning about what you just said, contacting an old flame, an old architect that you've been working with, doing that. But that is what it's all about. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I must confess, I'm a little embarrassed to bring that up but these photos that I have loved forever, and they were just, I don't know, I just didn't have the chops to edit them. And now that I do, I've reworked them, and they're now, these two images are on my website.
I'm looking at your website now. I'm guessing you're not going to tell me which ones.
I'm not going to. I have pride, Brian.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do see images that I've never seen from you before, though, so I can, by process of elimination.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so I definitely want to spend some time on the article and some of the myths that you speak about in the article. But actually, while we're talking about things you can do to boost your creativity, I have one more question I want to ask you. And we spoke about things you can do before a shoot, at a shoot, and after a shoot. But I'm curious your thoughts on what people can do, not even in a shoot perspective, but just typical on their everyday go about, what they can do to try to get themselves in a more creative thought process. And the reason I ask this is I read a book about 2 months ago called The Creative Habit. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it. I heard of it. Yeah.
It's by Twala Tharp. And, to give you the book in a nutshell, what she says is, and she's a Broadway producer. So she produced a lot of different Broadway shows. And she says, the best way to stay creative is to create habits for yourself.
Correct.
And do the same thing. If you wake up at 5:30 every day, wake up at 5:30 every day. And if you go out for a run at 5:45 a.m., do it every day and follow a routine. And, it's weird because when I first read it, my thought process was, I would think it would be the opposite. It's counterintuitive, isn't it? Doing different things would make more sense to me. to come up with different ideas. And then it's funny because then when I sat back and took a look at my life, I realized that my whole life was such a routine and a schedule. That's kind of what I did. I wake up at 5:30 every day. Well, not now, but when we're in normal world, I wake up at 5:30 every day. I go out to the gym for an hour. I come home. I make sure to get home before, right as the kids are waking up, and help my wife get the kids off to school. Then I go down and work for a little bit. Like I have such a routine, and you don't realize you do. And then when you read stuff like this, you're like, it doesn't make sense that I would work, but I guess that's kind of what I do. I have a routine.
Yeah. And I think that applies to all of us. We have our routines at a real estate shoot. I'm a big proponent of breaking routines, but yeah, I have read the same thing, that there's something about the routine that is comfortable for the brain, and that may be the secret, Brian. That it's not just about the routine; it's the comfort level for the brain, right? That's a big. So I guess that's to loop back what I said a little while ago about not being so hard on ourselves. It's very hard to be creative if you're if you're cracking the whip on yourself and calling yourself names. It's very tough to be creative. So yeah, I think somewhere in there, I've got no science to back this up, but intuitively for me, I think, yeah, there's a great deal of value in routine, but within it, I think there's a great deal of value in shaking things up.
Cool. All right, so let's shift over to your article for a few minutes, because I know we're running low on time here, but I do want to talk about it. And your article essentially, it's titled "Are You Getting in the Way of Your Own Creativity?" And you talk about 4 myths that I guess are common thoughts about creativity.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about each of them quickly, but the first one I think we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, where he said, the first myth, number 1, not everyone is a creative.
Oh, that's just nonsense.
Yeah. We started getting into it a little bit earlier, where we talked about the biggest problem is most people don't realize what they're doing is creative in some way, shape, or form, whether it's, even if they're not if they don't think they're coming up with, creative compositions, for instance, or creative lighting techniques, but just their thought process of where to put the camera is a creative decision.
Yeah.
So,
so that's the first myth. And that's probably one of the biggest ones that people need to get over. So someone says, "Oh, geez, I can't draw anything. When I try to draw, all I end up with is a stick man." Well, yeah, you can't draw it because you haven't practiced at it, right? It doesn't mean that you don't have that capability. And look, I'm not saying that somewhere deep inside we all have Leonardo da Vinci. What I'm saying is that somewhere inside of us, we all have creativity. And yeah, so from the time when you were a kid, if all you can draw is stick people, okay, because that's all you've ever tried to draw. But I bet you that if you were to take some time, go online, take an online drawing course, now that the schools are closed, I would bet cash money that people would discover wells of creativity doing that. So I believe wholeheartedly that everyone is creative.
Cool. Myth number 2: unless you're doing something completely original, you're not truly a creative.
I don't think there is such thing as original thought. I think every song, every painting, is inspired. I mean, you could be a design firm who has just designed the greatest supermarket shopping cart in the history of shopping carts, but guess what? They had the old-fashioned shopping carts as a starting point.
Correct. You didn't invent the shopping cart.
That's right. So all of these things are improvements. I think, I forget his name, a very, very famous artist who said that the best way to get creative is to steal from other people.
Leonardo da Vinci. There you go.
Being a copycat And I could tell you, I do that in my other work with corporate leaders. Once I've done an assessment of what sort of issue a leader or a leadership team is going through, it's not as if I'm inventing some sort of intervention that's never been tried, but I go online and I do a Google search and I read what other folks have done. And then I think about those interventions over a day or two or a week. And over time, things start to come together. I don't know how, they just do. And I offer that to my clients.
Cool. Okay. Myth number 3, creative thinking is all that's required for creativity.
No. No. You can
explain that a little bit, because I mean, that might be a little confusing to some just that are listening, that are just hearing me say it out loud.
What is required to be creative is to act on the thought. That's what that myth is all about. It's not enough just to think creatively. You could be an Einstein in your own head, but if you don't put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, that creativity doesn't have an outlet.
No, for sure. To use an example.
So in the article, I talk about if it stays in your head, it's like mental gymnastics. It's Cirque du Soleil in your brain. Mm-hmm. It has to be expressed somehow. So creativity is an expression of that spark that we've been talking about.
Sure. Yeah. I read a perfect analogy earlier today, actually, in a completely separate article I was reading that said basically you can read and learn as much as you want about physical fitness, but if you don't go to the gym, you're not going to get into shape.
Exactly. So, it's funny, one of the best pieces of advice when coming out of university, when I was doing the psychology thing, one of my first supervisors, because I was struggling, because it's a hard thing to do to go into a session and try to help a person or a couple wanting to improve their marriage. And I thought that the solution for that was to read and to read and to read and try to memorize all these techniques. And one of the best pieces of advice that I got from my supervisor at the time, he said, Tony, continue reading, continue learning, but when you're in session, forget all of it. Because somehow, some way, everything that you've read is in your brain. It's going to come out. You have to trust your creative instincts that you are going to offer an insight or suggest a bit of homework that will take advantage of the things that you've been reading about. So that was a really good piece of advice.
Okay, and the last myth, which we touched upon a little bit in our conversation earlier, but a positive, calm environment is essential to being truly creative. And, I think we kind of touched upon some of those ideas, but... Yeah,
I think it can be helpful, but is it absolutely required? Do you have to... Is creativity always produced out of a Zen moment? And the answer is no. It's amazing how focused the mind can get.
Well, according to Rich, you just get stoned. So.
Or drunk.
Yeah.
Or drunk.
Or drunk.
We're in California, you get stoned.
I'm done.
It's amazing what a deadline can do. Mm-hmm. How much creativity is inspired by a deadline. And it's funny because in that article, I actually cite one of the best examples of this out of 20th century marketing. The advertising firm that was hired by 7-Up, they were told, we need a new campaign. We're falling behind Pepsi and Coca-Cola. We have to compete. So you had all these executive tables, late into the evening every night trying to come up with how does 7-Up compete. And someone in a fit of inspiration said, well, wait a second, why are we trying to compete? Why are we trying to be the same? How are we different? And in a flash, someone said, well, really what we are is we're the Uncola, right? And that Uncola campaign must have lasted 15 years. It's one of the great marketing campaigns in the history of business.
The Uncola.
Yeah.
More than
So
15
here
days.
you have these ad execs who had a deadline. They had a presentation the next day, or in a couple of days, to the senior executives at 7-Up, and they had nothing, right? And they're sitting around one night, and some guy says, "Well, it's not a cola. Why are we trying to compete against cola? We're not a cola." And someone said, "Yeah, we're the Uncola," and legend was born. That started a multi-year advertising campaign, and they were heroes.
Cool stuff. Well, I want to suggest everyone to go read this article if you haven't read it yet. And I know it was about 2 months ago. So if you go to PFRE's website, in the top left, there's a search bar, and just search creativity. It'll pop right up. It's the first article there. As of now, as of the time of this recording, it's the first article up there. So I want to suggest everyone go up there. But speaking of creativity, and this will be my final question as we run low on time, Tony, you publicly announced at PFRE in Vegas in November that you're in a major rut. Have you passed that? Have your creative juices started flowing, or are you back?
I don't even remember. I have a vague recollection of writing that. Yeah.
You didn't write. No, you said it on stage. You said, "I'm in a bit of a rut myself now," something along those lines.
Yes, actually, I have gotten over it, and I have to the way that I got over it is I was realizing that I was just so dog tired that on my drive, and this speaks to the attitude piece, on my drive to the photo shoot, I was dreading it. I just wanted to stay home and rest. And I thought to myself, you know something? My dad, rest his soul, when he came to Canada, he had to work 3 or 4 jobs. And here I get to go into a multi-million-dollar home and push a button, right? So I said, get over yourself. And I started thinking about looking forward to walking into somebody's house, looking forward to finding things. And I got to tell you, Brian, the results started coming right after that. I started looking, and here I am. I've got this video out on composition, and I found myself, that was the biggest rut. I was falling back on the safe compositional choices. And I started taking chances with my own compositions, and I'm very, very pleased with my progress over the last few months.
Sure. So the biggest takeaway, based off what you just said, is don't be afraid to fail, and that'll open a whole new world for you.
Yeah. If that's your takeaway, then that's great.
That's my takeaway. I mean, look, that was my takeaway when I read the book Creativity Inc. But you just kind of said it yourself, so you reiterated that, and I value your opinion. So,
right.
That being said, Rich, do you have any other questions or?
No, perfect. I really enjoyed this, and I know our listeners will enjoy it too, because again, we get a lot of feedback that when we get things out of the, things
out of
like
the box,
outside the box, creative things, the listeners, viewers and listeners really enjoy it and value it. So as always, thank you so much. You never fail. You always bring something interesting and new to me. I mean, of all our guests, I can definitely say you may be the top one that I just enjoy listening to you. And I wish we were closer because I come and hang out, but I can't anyway because of the COVID-19 thing.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say, and I'm very appreciative of you saying that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Now, Rich, before we say our goodbyes, I just want to give Tony the opportunity to plug some of his stuff, as always. So why don't you let our listeners tell them where they can find you online, where they can find your tutorial, where they can contact you if they're interested in some of your coaching, which I highly suggest. Rich, I almost convinced you to start doing some coaching with Tony, but you'll get there.
I will.
Thank you. My website is www.tcphotography.ca. On the left-hand side, where you have the navigation links, there are links there for coaching and my tutorial on composition, the art and science of great composition. I'm also on Instagram. TC Photography 99. for folks that want to follow me there. And thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for allowing me to mention those things.
Sure. And we also have...
Let me say one thing. Of all the tutorials I've watched, and I've watched a lot, I got to say, in all of the interviews I've done and things like that, the composition, what I've learned from you in composition, but you just started the ball going. Where it's come to me is in the last several years, it's definitely the number one technique that has helped me to just feel good about what I'm doing. And it's so amazing how important and how pertinent it is, and how you just do a little bit of education and the results are amazing. So, that composition, if you're not really thinking about composition out there and you're thinking about new gear and new full frame camera, this and that, now you're missing it. Composition, baby, that is going to
especially now, when perhaps income and revenue is going to go down a little bit. The best, fastest, easiest way to improve is by working on composition with the gear that you already have.
I'm doing composition down in Mexico on cactus. I'm serious. Everything is rule of third. I'm totally and also, if you don't have your grid and your camera on, you're missing it, because put that rule of thirds grid in there. But anyway, thank you so much, Tony.
Sure. And we also have the webinar with you, Tony. If people want to take, after your tutorial, if you want to take that even one step further, where we went in and critiqued listener submitted images and used your composition techniques to critique them, that's definitely I guess the next step after your tutorial. Cool. But Rich, this is our last episode before we go on break for a little bit. That's it.
Virtual hug, guys. Wait. Okay. Anyway, we're going to be taking a little hiatus, as we did last year, and it's helping us. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really it's kind of a tough time to take a hiatus because everyone's home now and can listen. But I know it's going to give ourselves a chance to regroup and get more creative with our ideas and bringing episodes to people. I think we all need that. We're at episode, I don't know, 106, 107 now, which is crazy. I don't know if you know, Tony, how many we did 106 episodes, which is insane in a little over 2 years.
Yeah, I'm aware.
So it gives us a chance to kind of just reboot and come back at it strong and put together a nice list of guests for everybody. And, kind of like the last little hiatus, what did we have, like 2 months last time, Rich? We came back right before PFRE. So it'll be probably something like that. And I'm sure because of what's going on and we won't be out there for people, we'll probably do a bunch of Facebook Lives throughout and come up with different things, maybe some webinars. So we'll be out there. We're not going to be totally gone, but we're going to start putting together a nice list of guests for our...
We need a break. It really is hard to keep the creative juices going. And if for anybody that's done a podcast, that's why there aren't a lot of podcasts out there for this, because, well, there are now, but I don't know, some of them go and come and go and come. It's hard. It's a lot of work, creativity, really got to get creative. So.
Yeah.
Well, to come up with content for just about 110 episodes has not been easy, but we're there. We're there now. So
good for you.
Yeah, cool. So, Rich, I guess I will see you when we come back.
Yeah, and everybody out there, man, subscribe to our podcast, Shooting Spaces, podcast.com. And if you want to go read some stuff, see some webinars, presets, all kinds of stuff, it's at shootingspaces.net. And I've got my YouTube channel, and we're doing all kinds of things. And we're going to do more webinars coming up. We got to get creative to do more webinars. But awesome, man. And thank you, Tony, for taking us out on this section of our life right now. And again, I pray and wish everybody to be safe and happy and use this time to get better at something. Come out of it better than come out of it better, stronger than you were before, and spend time with your family, and hopefully by the time this comes out, we're going to be on the backside. So we'll see, hopefully.
God willing.
All right. All the best, everybody.
Yeah, be safe, social distancing. And if you're going to go out and shoot some spaces, you might have to shoot them alone. Add Measurements Expert to your credentials when you purchase an iGuide IMS5 camera. iGuide is a turnkey solution that expands a real estate photographer's business beyond photography to add 3D tour technology, laser-accurate floor plans, reliable room dimensions, and square footage calculations. Visit goiguide.com to schedule a quick demo and see just how easy it is to incorporate iGuide into your real estate photography business. Tell them you heard about it on Shooting Spaces.
This has been Shooting Spaces. For more episodes, visit shootingspacespodcast.com and visit our education site at shootingspaces.net.